Your destiny is reflecting in the chrome surfaces of the future, waiting for you to step forward and claim it. Join us for the stories of those who dare to take control and rewrite their own history. Click subscribe now and start building your own cinematic legacy today.
My name is Jolene Marsh. I'm 29 years old. When I was 23, my father stood at a podium in front of 170 people at my brother's law school graduation dinner and said, "We always knew one of our children was going to change the world. Tonight we're watching him do it." He paused, smiled at my brother the way you smile at something you built with your own hands, and then added, "And we're so grateful God saw fit to give us one worth betting on." The room applauded. My mother pressed her hand to her chest like she might cry from pride. My brother, in his robe and honors cord, laughed and shook his head the way people do when they're embarrassed by how loved they are. I was sitting at the round table near the back of the hotel ballroom, the one that had been clearly added as an afterthought because the original seating chart hadn't included me. I found out I was attending 3 days before the event when my mother left a voicemail that said, "We got an extra seat if you want to come." Not an invitation, a vacancy. I had driven 4 hours from Nashville for that vacancy. I set my water glass down on the white tablecloth. I straightened my fork. And I did the math I'd been doing since I was 12 years old. How many times my father had introduced me at family events versus how many times he'd introduced my brother. Over the past 6 years of my tracking, the numbers were not close. I started counting things when I was in 7th grade. It was the year I realized that what I felt in our house wasn't just normal family friction, it was a system. My brother Ryland was born in 1990. I came 3 years later in 1993. We grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in a house with a covered porch and a magnolia tree in the front yard that my father trimmed himself every fall. Nice neighborhood. Good schools. A family that looked, from the outside, exactly like the kind of family you'd want to grow up in. From the inside, there was a hierarchy so clear and consistent that by the time I was 15, I'd stopped questioning whether it was real and started just measuring it. My father is a civil engineer. My mother ran a tutoring center for 12 years before retiring. 2 kids, one of each. Ryland got a bedroom with bookshelves my father built himself over a full weekend. I got the room next to the washing machine, which ran 3 times a week, and vibrated my wall at 6 a.m. When I asked if we could switch, my father looked at me the way you look at a stranger asking to borrow your car. "Ryland needs the quiet for studying," he said. Ryland was 10. I was 7. Neither of us was studying anything. The homework table was another thing. Every evening my father would sit with Ryland at the dining room table and go through his assignments. Math problems, spelling lists, reading comprehension. He had a red pen he used just for that. When I brought my homework to that table, my father would glance over, say, "Looks fine," and go back to whatever Ryland was working on. I started doing my homework in the hall closet when I was 9. There was a shelf low enough to use as a desk if I sat on the floor. I kept a flashlight in there. I finished 3 years of elementary school homework in that closet. When I was 14, I told my mother. She sighed in the way that isn't really a sigh but a door closing. "Your father is hard on Ryland because Ryland needs the push," she said. "You're self-sufficient, Jolene. That's a compliment." I wrote that down in my notebook, the one I kept under the floorboard at the back of my closet, not the hall closet. My actual closet. Numbers felt more stable than feelings. Feelings changed shape, numbers held. How many times my father said Ryland's name at dinner in a week versus mine, averaged 14 to 2 over a 4-month tracking period. How many times my mother asked about my day versus Ryland's 8 to 31 over the same period. How many times either of them came to my school events. 3. Over 6 years of middle and high school combined. Every single one of those 3 was an event Ryland also attended, which meant they were already in the building. I graduated from high school with a 3.7 and a part-time job at a garden center I'd held since sophomore year. My parents attended. They left early because Ryland had a law school admissions meeting the next morning in Atlanta, and they were driving him down that night. I found out from a neighbor who'd taken photos. I got into the University of Tennessee on partial scholarship. My parents did not help with the rest. Ryland's undergraduate tuition, room, board, and a used Civic had been covered in full. When I asked my father about my gap, he said, "We spent what we had. You're resourceful." I was 19. I worked 2 jobs and took out $31,000 in loans over 4 years. Ryland got into law school at Vanderbilt. My parents threw a dinner party. 12 people, catered floral arrangements, my mother's good china. I wasn't invited to help plan it. I set the table and left before the guests arrived because no one had thought to ask if I was staying. The night of the graduation dinner, his law school graduation, 6 years later, I drove to Knoxville in a car with a passenger side mirror held on by electrical tape. I wore a dress I'd hemmed myself. I arrived on time. The vacancy at the back table was mine. When my father said what he said about one child worth betting on, there were 170 people in the room. Some of them knew me. A few of my extended family members were at that table. My great-aunt reached over and squeezed my hand, not because she was trying to comfort me, but because she was looking at the floral centerpiece, and the squeeze seemed accidental. Ryland laughed, his modest laugh. He raised his glass toward my father. My father raised his back. I counted how long the applause lasted. 31 seconds. I needed something to hold on to. I picked up my purse. I walked out through the side exit near the restrooms. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I got in my car in the hotel parking deck, and I sat in it for 27 minutes before I started the engine. No one texted to check on me. Not during the dinner, not after, not that night. I drove back to Nashville alone. It took 4 hours and 12 minutes. I bought coffee at a gas station outside of Murfreesboro and drank it too hot and didn't care. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table with my hands flat on the wood, and I said something out loud to no one. I said, "I am not going back." 2 days later, I blocked both of my parents. Then I blocked Ryland. I deleted the family group chat. I made my Facebook private, removed every family member, and eventually deactivated entirely. I took one full Sunday afternoon and removed every thread. I kept 2 people. My college roommate Seisuke, who had texted me at midnight after I got home that night. "I saw your Instagram. You okay?" She hadn't seen anything on my Instagram. She just knew. And my coworker at the design firm where I'd just started, a woman named Bet, who said on my first day that she liked my shoes and had meant it in a way that made me feel like a person. That was my family now. 2 people. I gave it a year. Then I gave it another. The garden center job from high school had become, through a series of decisions I made entirely without input from anyone in my family, a career in landscape architecture. I finished a graduate certificate program in Nashville while working full-time. I passed my licensing exam on the first attempt. I joined a small firm and worked my way to project lead by the time I was 26. By 28, I was managing a team of 4 on a mixed-use development in East Nashville that won a regional design award. My parents didn't know any of this. That was deliberate. I had a therapist named Dr. Nwachukwu who I saw every other Wednesday at noon. First appointment, she asked what brought me in. I said, "I think I've spent my whole life trying to earn something that was never going to be offered." She said, "Tell me more." I did. It took 14 sessions just to get through the first 20 years. By the time I was 29, I had a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side with a kitchen I'd renovated myself over 3 weekends. Subway tile backsplash, open shelving, a window above the sink that looked out onto a courtyard where I'd helped a neighbor plant a kitchen garden. I had savings. Real savings. Not emergency savings, retirement savings. A number that no one in my family knew about. I'd stopped thinking about them in long, continuous loops. It happened gradually, the way healing usually does. Not a moment. Just one day I noticed I hadn't counted anything in weeks. I thought I was finished. Then, on a Tuesday evening in October, while I was eating dinner and reading a library book about Japanese woodworking joinery, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Tennessee area code, but not Nashville, Chattanooga. I let it ring. 30 seconds later, a voicemail. I waited until I finished eating to listen to it. It was my cousin Petra. Not a first cousin, second, the daughter of my father's youngest brother. We'd never been close, but she'd been kind to me at family events in the way that some people are kind when they notice an unfair situation and can't quite bring themselves to name it. She said, "Jolene, I'm sorry to bother you. It's about Ryland. Please call me back when you can." I called her back. I had to find her number in my old contacts to do it. She answered on the second ring. Her voice had that careful quality people use when they're about to say something they've been rehearsing. Ryland had lost his job. Not a quiet departure, not a mutual decision. He'd been let go from the firm where he'd worked for 4 years, just 6 months before he was due to be considered for partner. The story she knew, pieced together from what my mother had told her own mother, was this: a case, a client, a billing discrepancy that Ryland had known about and had not corrected. The firm's ethics board had found it. They'd offered him a quiet exit if he signed a non-disclosure. He'd signed. That was 8 months ago. Since then, according to Petra, he hadn't found another position. He'd moved out of the condo he'd been renting and was living in my parents' house. He'd broken off an engagement. A woman I hadn't known about, someone he'd been with for 2 years. He was, by Petra's account, not doing well. He wasn't leaving the house most days. He wasn't answering his phone. He'd stopped eating regular meals. My mother had called Petra's mother in tears 3 weeks ago. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. Petra was quiet for a moment. "Because he keeps asking about you," she said. "I've seen him twice since this started. Both times he brought you up. He wants to know if you're okay." I sat with that. It didn't land the way I expected. "He knows I'm not in contact," I said. "He thinks it was, Jolene. He thinks you left because of something he did. Specifically." "What do you mean specifically?" Another pause. "The graduation dinner, what your dad said." She exhaled. "Ryland says he went to find you after, that night. He says he left the dinner early and came out to the parking deck, but you were already gone." I had not known that. "He tried to call you that week," she said. "He said your number didn't go through. He thought you'd blocked him." "I did block him," I said. 2 days later. "Not that night." "Oh," she said. And then, more quietly, "He doesn't know that." I set my phone against my shoulder and stared at my woodworking book for a moment. What did he say when the number didn't go through? He said he figured you were done with all of them and he didn't want to push. He said he didn't blame you. I thought about the parking deck, the way I'd sat in my car for 27 minutes, the fact that I'd checked my phone 4 times in the first hour of the drive home and received nothing. He had come looking. I hadn't known. "Jolene," Petra said, "I'm not telling you what to do. I just thought you should know what he thinks happened, because what I think he's going through right now, he's not okay, and he doesn't have a lot of people." I told her I'd think about it. I meant it as a polite exit. I sat on my couch for an hour after we hung up, not reading anything. I called Dr. Nwachukwu the next morning. We talked for an hour, which ran over by 20 minutes, and she didn't charge me for the extra time. She asked me her standard crossroads question: what's the risk of reaching out, and what's the risk of not? I said the risk of reaching out was everything I'd built in the past 6 years. The equilibrium, the not counting things, the apartment with the subway tile and the courtyard garden, and the savings account that was mine. She said, "And the risk of not reaching out." I was quiet. "I think he's drowning," I said, "and I think I'm one of the only people who would even notice. Because I've been watching him be reduced for years and I know what reduced looks like on him." I recognized it in Petra's voice. She asked me what I wanted to do, Not what I should do. What I wanted. I said, I want to know if he's okay, that's all. 4 days later, I called my mother. The number was still in my old contacts. She answered on the third ring. Her voice, when she realized it was me, did something complicated. Not surprise exactly, more like a door she'd been standing near for a long time opening. Jolene? Hi, Mom. A beat. Then, it's been a while. It has, I said. I heard about Ryland. She started to give me the managed version. I recognized it immediately. The same tone she used to use when relatives asked about me at family events. The phrasings designed to preserve shape. She said he was going through a transition, that the legal world was difficult, that he needed time to recalibrate. I cut her off at the third sentence. Is he leaving the house? Silence. Most days, no. Is he eating? Longer silence. We make sure there's food. That's not the same thing. I kept my voice level. Does he have a therapist? He doesn't want to see anyone. Has anyone other than you and Dad suggested one? The silence that followed told me everything. I had one more question. I'd been holding it for 6 years, and I wanted to ask it now before anything else, because I needed to know the shape of the landscape I was about to walk back into. Mom, I said. At Ryland's graduation dinner, when Dad made the toast, do you know what he said? She was quiet. Do you remember what he said about one child worth betting on? Jolene? That was. Do you remember? A pause so long I thought she might hang up. He was proud of Ryland. He didn't mean. He said it into a microphone, I said, in front of 170 people. And I was in the room. I let that sit for a moment. And then I drove 4 hours home alone and no one called. My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I'm not asking you to apologize right now, I said. I'm asking you to understand that that night was not a miscommunication. It was a pattern that reached its endpoint. And I need you to know that I know the difference before I decide what to do next. I took a breath. I'm going to call Ryland. Not because of you and Dad. For him. And if he's willing to get some help, I'm going to try to find out what that looks like. But I need you to stay out of how that goes. Can you do that? She said yes. I didn't fully believe her, but I made note of it. I hung up and sat for a while in my kitchen, looking at my courtyard garden through the window. Then I found Ryland's number in my old contacts. I didn't know if it was still active. I texted first, just, it's Jolene. Is this still your number? 47 seconds. I counted without meaning to. Yes, he texted back. Hi. I called him. He answered halfway through the first ring, which told me he'd been holding the phone. His voice was lower than I remembered. Slower. He'd always been quick in conversation, the kind of person who finished your sentences, who moved through a room the way people do when they're used to being the center of it. The voice on the phone had pauses in places I hadn't expected. I wasn't sure you'd call, he said. I wasn't sure either, I said. A short silence that was almost comfortable. I looked for you, he said. That night. After dinner. I know, Petra told me I didn't get to the parking deck in time. I thought about texting, but you tried to call, I said. I know. The timeline is more complicated than I understood it was. I didn't blame you for blocking me, he said. I want you to know that. You had every reason to. You came to find me, I said. You were my sister. A pause. You are my sister. I know I didn't act like it a lot of the time. I know I sat there and laughed. Another pause. I've thought about that a lot. I believed him, not because I'd forgiven everything, but because I'd lived in the same house he had, and I'd watched what it did to both of us in different ways, and I could hear in his voice that the shape of it wasn't new. Tell me what's been going on, I said. He did. It took a long time. The billing situation at the firm. He'd noticed a discrepancy in a client's hours and hadn't corrected it because a senior partner had implied it wasn't his business to correct. He'd known it was wrong. He'd told himself he'd fix it quietly later. He hadn't fixed it. When the ethics review came, he'd been the one left without a chair. The senior partner was still at the firm. Ryland was the one who'd signed the NDA and cleaned out his office. He described the aftermath the way people describe things they've been alone with for too long. Disconnected at the seams. Too much detail in some places and not enough in others. He said the engagement had ended because he'd told his fiancée the truth, and she'd decided, rationally, that she didn't want to build a life on that foundation yet. He said he didn't blame her. He said that a lot, I noticed. He didn't blame anyone. That was new. Or maybe it was just what happened when everything ran out. He said he'd been at my parents' house for 6 months. He said my father still talked about the firm in the present tense, as if Ryland were on sabbatical. He said my mother told people he was consulting independently. He said neither of them had suggested a therapist or a recovery plan or anything with a timeline. They're protecting the story, I said. He laughed, short and flat. Yeah, they did that when I left too, I said. They told you I needed space. That's not what happened. He was quiet. I left because of what Dad said. I left because no one called. I blocked them 2 days later and changed my number a week after that. By the time you tried to reach me, the number was already gone. But I didn't know you'd tried. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I thought you chose this. I know, I said. That's partly why I'm calling. We stayed on the phone for 2 hours and 20 minutes. At some point, I got up and made tea. At some point, he started talking about things further back than the firm, the dinner table, the way our father would ask about his cases versus the way he'd looked at me at family events. He said, I always knew it wasn't fair. I think I told myself that knowing it was enough. A pause. It wasn't enough. I didn't rush to agree with him, or to reassure him. I just let it be there. Near the end of the call, I asked him if he'd be willing to see a therapist. He said he didn't know where to start. I said I'd help him find someone if he wanted. No pressure on timeline, just a name and a number. What he did with it was his. He said, okay. We hung up at 11:47 at night. I sat with my tea and my woodworking book, which I hadn't opened in 3 hours, and I looked at the courtyard. A light was on in one of the units across the way. Someone was up late. I watched the light for a while. 3 days later, I did the research. I found 4 therapists in Chattanooga with availability and good reviews who dealt with professional identity crisis and family of origin patterns. I texted Ryland the list. No explanation, no instructions, just 4 names and their contact information. He texted back, thank you. He called the second one on the list that afternoon. I know because he texted me after to say he had an appointment the following Tuesday. I called my mother 2 weeks later to give her a single update. Ryland had started seeing someone and it was going well. She said, can we come to? Not yet, I said. That's his call to make, not yours. She started to say something about being his parents, about having a right to be involved in his recovery. I let her finish. Then I said, you had 6 months to help him and you managed the story instead. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it so that we're in the same conversation about what happened. She was quiet. When he decides he's ready to include you, he will. I'll respect that decision either way. She asked if we could talk. She meant she and I, about everything. She said she thought there were things that needed to be said. I told her I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, and that when I was, I would be the one to start it. She said, okay. I half believed her again. I hadn't spoken to my father. He had not reached out. That was not a surprise. My father communicates through rooms, through presence, through whether or not there's a chair at the table for you. I'd learned to read his language early. The absence of contact was its own sentence. Ryland and I talk every Sunday now. We started with short calls, 20 minutes, checking in. We've slowly gotten longer. He's still at my parents' house, but he's looking at apartments. He's not ready to be fully out yet. And he's been honest about that, which is different from the version of him I grew up watching, the version that always had it together and always had an explanation. 2 weeks ago, he said, I think I spent 30 years performing for them, and I didn't even know that's what I was doing. I thought I was just succeeding. I thought about my hall closet, my flashlight. My green spiral notebook. I said, I know. He said, does it get better? Actually better, not just managed. I thought about my apartment, my team of 4, my courtyard window, Dr. Nwachukwu on the other end of the phone at 7 in the morning when I needed her most, my friend Suki, who had texted without a reason and meant it, my coworker Bet, who had seen me on my first day and said something true. I said, yes. But it takes time. You didn't get to start early enough, so you have to be patient with yourself about the pace. He said, I don't know how to do that. I said, I know. That's what you're paying Dr. Patel for. He laughed. Real, not flat. The first time I'd heard it from him since before all of this. I haven't decided about my parents. That's the honest answer. I keep it in the same category as things I'm not finished thinking through, not shelved, not decided, just open. My father's silence feels like a position he's holding. I'm not sure yet whether I want to be the one to move first. I'm not sure I owe him that. I'm not sure I owe him anything, actually. What I know is that I'm not carrying his voice in my head the way I used to. The one that said, one child worth betting on. It still lives somewhere, but I don't hear it the way I did when I was in that ballroom, at that table, counting 31 seconds. What I proved to myself in all of this, when I talked to Dr. Nwachukwu about what I'd done and why, is something I've been sitting with for weeks. She asked me, what did you learn about yourself from going back? I thought for a long time before I answered. I said, I learned that I could walk back into the place where I was the least and still know who I was. I could sit on the floor of my brother's apartment with him and not dissolve. I could talk to my mother on the phone and say the true things without shaking. I could drive to a city that had told me for 25 years that I was the wrong answer, and still know, in every part of myself, that I wasn't. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing, actually. Ryland gets his own story from here. I'm not writing it for him, and I'm not carrying the parts he has to work through himself. What I can do, what I have done, is be someone he can call on a Sunday evening and talk to for an hour without performing. That's new for both of us. We're building it slowly, without a blueprint, with a lot of pauses and a few false starts, and some conversations that go sideways and have to be picked back up the following week. It's real, though. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not a version of family that looks right from the outside. Not a Christmas card, not a ballroom, with floral arrangements and a podium and someone counting 31 seconds of applause. Real. Ours. Built from what was actually left after everything else fell away. My name is Jolene Marsh. I was the child they didn't bet on. The one who sat in the back of the room and counted the applause. I stopped counting. That was the whole point, not the revenge, not the reckoning, not even the phone call that started all of this. The point was the morning I woke up and didn't need a notebook to prove to myself that I existed. If you are at someone else's table right now, in the back of a room that wasn't arranged with you in mind, I want you to know something. Their math was never about you. Their arithmetic was about them. Their fears, their investments, their need to have something that proved they mattered. You were never the variable they were solving for. You were just in the room when they did the equation. Leave the room, do the math yourself. The numbers will be different.